Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so it's only been 5 days since Chad Daybell got the death penalty in his Idaho murder trial. Okay, so I think the public is feeling a lot of relief right now. I think the public is feeling some measure of closure. And I'm sure the victims' families feel, I think, some amount of satisfaction with the outcome of Chad's trial. However, I think all of us also feel that there's a lot we still don't know about the Daybell murders, especially with regard to how much and to what extent Chad's children may either be covering up for him now or may have actually had something to do with helping him get away with these murders.
Do you recall talking to an individual named Micaiah Bagelin and telling him you found your mom dead in her bed and your dad gone?
I don't recall talking to him about that.
He told me that he was the one that found his mom when he got home from work the previous weekend. And he said that he got home and he couldn't find his dad, and that his mom was either next to the bed or on the bed. I don't remember what he said. But she was pale and her lips were blue.
And that includes how far Chad Daybell's influence stretched into the Brandon Boudreaux shooting, and also Charles being killed down in Chandler, Arizona.
I had my dad sending me threatening messages saying things about the shooting and that Brandon Boudreaux's claiming, and I never even know, I still to this day don't know if this shooting actually happened or who did this.
Do you think it was Alex?
The only time I thought it was Alex was I think the first initial fear of could Alex have done something like this. But Brandon was so sure, but his story kept changing. So still to this day, I don't know what happened in this shooting. I've been trying to put the pieces together of what's going on because I don't have the facts to that. But the knowledge that I do have, it doesn't add up. And still to this day, I have not seen one shred of evidence about this shooting Brandon's claiming that leads me to believe that it was Alex Cox.
Okay, I included this clip from Melanie Boudreaux, because I don't think I've ever seen such a brazen, bold-faced, dishonest statement made to a national audience. And this is a person who has no shame whatsoever facing the national public or facing law enforcement. Okay, and she's right there next to her husband Ian, and I am firmly convinced. You guys can come after me, you guys can criticize me, but it's my opinion. And I'm firmly convinced that Ian has sort of helped the FBI. I think he's gone through the camouflage. I think he's gone through the pantomime of sort of, putting a wire and making recordings, because I think they already knew that Chad was checkmated. And I think he was going to his second plan B, which was to protect his wife. Okay. And I think we're really underestimating the steel trap of family loyalty in this case. So I'm left with two really interesting impressions of this really spectacular Mormon context murder case. Okay, the first thing that I find really interesting is that we have this really bold and really spectacular crime being committed almost in a kind of Bonnie and Clyde style. Okay, where you have this really tight couple who's really in love, and they have this really intense love in a Mormon context, and they're committing spectacular crimes. Okay, spectacular crimes, right? So it's kind of like this weird Mormon, I'm going to say Mormon Bonnie and Clyde. Okay, and then on the other hand, we see this incredible steel trap of family loyalty of all the family members around this Mormon Bonnie and Clyde. So if you think of it as sort of like I'm going to use sort of the Mormon paradigm of the Mormon marriage and the Mormon children. And I'm using the word children loosely because I think you could see like the constellation of people around Chad and Lori as sort of being like the children of these cult leaders, if you want to call it that. I mean, it's just a loose analogy, but basically what you see is sort of a Mormon Bonnie and Clyde with really legendary level, epic level criminality. Okay. And a steel trap of absolute family loyalty, or even today, even from people like Zulema and from both Melanies and from Chad's children, you get the idea that even if they're starting to leak out a little bit of truth and they are cooperating to some extent, you get the idea they're holding back and we're not getting the full truth of what really happened. And that's where this case gets interesting. Okay. And I'm not kidding how interesting this is. Okay. Because if you look at the history of Western crimes in the West, epic, legendary, mysterious, epic level crimes in the West, okay, one of the most mysterious and to this day legendary and just mythical crimes that was committed in the West was the DB Cooper skyjacking of a Northwest Airlines 727. Okay, I'm talking about the DB Cooper skyjacking of an airliner. Okay, and I am here to tell you, okay, that crime was, I believe, and I will give you evidence in this video to support it. Okay, but I believe that was a Mormon crime, But what a lot of people do not know is that was a Bonnie and Clyde Mormon married couple crime. Okay. And that involved family dynamics, okay, where they had children, and there was also a sister-in-law involved, okay, who all collaborated and kept quiet and gave false information to the FBI. And only due to their family secrets and their family collaboration, it was never discovered it never became public, okay, that the DB Cooper case was actually a Mormon family Bonnie and Clyde style crime. Okay. And this is even worse. Okay, back in 1991, okay, a former US probation officer and a former FBI agent, they got together and they put the evidence together. They actually worked on this case, okay? And they actually proved, I believe, who was DB Cooper, right? And they proved it was a Mormon guy from Springville, okay, from Provo, Springville, right? Amazing. I mean, this is a connection with Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell's from Springville. I'm not saying that they're directly connected, but we can learn a lot from this. So these two federal law enforcement officials, okay, they actually published a book in 1991, okay, and guess what happened? Just like Melanie Pawlowski has all her lawyers and all her aggressive lawyering and her super confident, bold-faced, brazen dishonesty, okay, the wife of who is the real DB Cooper, all right, she put up this massive lawsuit and quashed a book that was written by a couple of federal law enforcement officials that solved the case, I think, okay, and just completely put it out of public consciousness, all right? So this was solved. The DB Cooper case was solved in 1991, and it's only because of a steel trap of, I would say, Mormon family loyalty. Okay, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say a steel trap of Mormon family loyalty that the DB Cooper case has never been solved. Okay, although you guys are going to see that it is now coming into the light because the children of DB Cooper, the real DB Cooper, they have finally come out and come clean. It's just that nobody knows about it.
And who is Richard McCoy?
And I can tell you from 20 plus years in the FBI that if, in fact, we could have made McCoy as DB Cooper, we would have done it. End of story.
Okay, that's a clip taken from a publicity documentary around the 1991 book that I just mentioned. Okay, the book written by the two federal law enforcement officials that was quashed by the family of DB Cooper, right? Okay, but they're interviewing an FBI agent, and this is part of the problem because at the time of that video, the FBI publicly was not accusing this person in Springville, Utah, of being DB Cooper. Okay, and I think part of the problem. I mean, there was probably some politics going on, but I think part of the problem was that the family was so united. This family around DB Cooper, they were so united, and they were all telling the same lies to law enforcement that the FBI felt that this person in Springville, this Mormon guy in Springville, Utah, they felt that he had an alibi. Okay, or at least they were publicly saying that. We'll see that's very flimsy.
Less than 6 months after DB Cooper bailed out with $200,000, former U.S. Army Green Beret Richard McCoy hijacked United Airlines Flight 855 from Denver to Los Angeles. McCoy hijacked the plane, diverted it to San Francisco, demanded parachutes and $500,000, and then he bailed out over Utah. 2 days later, the FBI arrested McCoy at his home in Provo. A search of the house turned up the grenade, the gun, and $499,970 in cash.
Okay, so this Mormon guy, okay, from the Provo, Springville area of Utah, all right, this Mormon guy. Now the FBI here, they're pretending they don't believe he's DB Cooper, but he was convicted. Okay, this is a fact. And this was kind of kept out of the news, but this Mormon guy from the Provo area, he was convicted. He did skyjack another plane. Okay, he did a copycat. The DB Cooper was a Northwest Airlines out of Portland, but this guy from Utah, this Mormon guy from Provo, Utah, he was caught. Okay, when he hijacked another Boeing 727 a United Airlines flight out of Denver. Okay. Very, very similar modus operandi. He parachuted out of the plane in flight right over Provo, Utah, and he landed in Springville, Utah. Okay. And so why wouldn't he just admit that he was DB Cooper? He was already sentenced for this second hijacking. He was sentenced to 45 years in the federal penitentiary. So why not just admit that he was DB Cooper? And this is the problem, because his wife was a conspirator. Okay, it was a Bonnie and Clyde family crime, and the wife's sister, the sister-in-law, she was also one of the conspirators. Okay, so there's a big family steel trap around this Mormon Bonnie and Clyde stuff. So they couldn't afford to mention the DB Cooper, because that would put his wife in jail and also maybe his sister-in-law as well. So the family kind of set up this steel trap, and that's why we could never associate this with the DB Cooper case. But these two law enforcement guys, now maybe they didn't fully understand the family dynamics. That'll come later. But they did figure out that this guy really was DB Cooper.
There seems good reason to believe Cooper and McCoy were the same man. Start with the way they look.
Now, there are a lot of DB Cooper experts on the internet, okay, who will say that they don't believe that Richard McCoy was really DB Cooper, and they'll say that these images, okay, of what DB Cooper's, like, say the artist sketch versus, and also, like, say, the witness accounts of what the actual DB Cooper looked like. Let's say that doesn't really look like Richard McCoy, although, when there's going to be other aspects of this case that make it likely he was probably wearing a disguise. He probably put makeup on. Okay. And the reason why is because there's very solid evidence that this devout Mormon, set up a fake alibi. Okay. And that he, instead of being home in Provo for Thanksgiving, he was actually in Las Vegas. Okay. Laundering money, probably. So, I mean, what would a devout Mormon be doing in Las Vegas, and then lying about it, setting up an alibi, so right there, it's so fishy. So more than likely, if there's any difference in the appearance, it's probably, and it's not much of a difference, but it's probably because the actual, Richard McCoy, he was probably wearing some kind of makeup. And let's not forget, this guy was special forces in the Army. Okay, he was not only a pilot, but he had also been special forces in the Army, so he probably knew how to, camouflage himself or whatever.
Well, the modus operandi, the MO, had McCoy's signature all over it.
Okay, now as a former pilot myself, okay, I can say that the next piece of evidence, okay, is just, to me, it just eliminates all reasonable doubt. Now, and this is where I think pilots, and I'll explain later that a former Delta Airlines captain, okay, who has taken an interest in this case, he's also kind of cracked this case, okay? And so I really think that, I think pilots should have special consideration in this case, because there's some aspect of the way that DB Cooper and Richard Floyd McCoy, the way they operated, where only a pilot would really understand how unusual was their MO, okay? And the most unusual MO to me, the most unusual aspect of the MO was that Richard Floyd McCoy and DB Cooper, okay, they both use FAA flight plan forms, okay, to give instructions to the pilots, and they gave very pilot-oriented instructions that only a pilot would know. So that really narrows down who could actually have committed these crimes, okay? And it really kind of makes it obvious when you compare with, like, the Las Vegas alibi stuff. It makes it very, very clear to me that DB Cooper really was Richard Floyd McCoy.
He used notes typed ahead of time to tell the pilot where to fly the plane. Richard McCoy, a helicopter and fixed-wing pilot, did exactly the same thing on United Airlines Flight 855 6 months later. The hijackers used something a bit more unique than typing paper for their notes.
They used aviation flight plans, both of them. There wasn't any way Richard McCoy would have known about that, because those had been protected. That kind of evidence in the DB Cooper case was protected by the FBI.
Okay, so the public had no access to these items of evidence. Like, only the FBI knew, and it was very protected, that the actual DB Cooper had used FAA flight plan forms, okay? But nobody in the public could ever have known that there was also some phraseology, okay, in the DB Cooper case, where he would put in these instructions, no funny stuff. And that same phrase shows up in the Richard McCoy hijacking, using also FAA flight plans. So, to me, it's a no-brainer.
The flight crews of both planes remember the hijacker kept using the phrase, no funny stuff. Witnesses described Cooper as dark-skinned and older, with yellow stains on his fingers.
We know in the McCoy case that he put a heavy, dark makeup on.
Former Utah FBI Chief Russ Callum figures McCoy got makeup on his first 2 fingers while putting on the makeup in the Cooper case, and the crew mistook it for nicotine stains from smoking.
Okay, now just with the use of the flight plan forms, okay, that to me eliminates all reasonable doubt. When you combine it with the need to fabricate an alibi when he's really in Las Vegas on the Thanksgiving of 1971. So for me, reasonable doubt's eliminated. But now we know that even in the United hijacking, the one that is definitely attributed to Richard McCoy, we know that he was using dark makeup. And that would explain why his appearance, later, when he's having his mugshots, that would explain why that doesn't match perfectly with what witnesses reported and the artist's sketch from the actual D.B. Cooper hijacking.
Cooper was described, if you recall, as being about 45 years of age, kind of having a swarthy complexion. I think while he was in the plane, he smoked, and he did have a drink.
The FBI's Robin Montgomery points out that as a Mormon, McCoy neither drank nor did he smoke.
The problem with this, and the reason why I really don't believe what the FBI is saying, they must have a reason to give misinformation, is because it was already known in both hijackings, or at least in the second hijacking. It was known that McCoy had used dark makeup. Okay, so the fact that he'd be camouflaging his appearance, why not, as part of his camouflage, also be doing behaviors that are inconsistent with his Mormon identity? If as a Mormon, he's a non-smoker, a non-drinker, obviously part of his camouflage would be to engage in behaviors that would throw people off. So he might hold a drink, he might pretend to smoke cigarettes. And, so to me, I'm not really, I have to assume the FBI is up to something here.
D.B. Cooper left a clue on the airplane. The clue that he left on the airplane was a tie tack, a very distinctive tie tack.
Former prosecutor Jim Housley figures that clue ties McCoy to Cooper.
In the investigation of the McCoy case, they found a Polaroid picture of McCoy wearing a tie with that tie tack.
McCoy's mother-in-law and his sister-in-law were both shown a photograph of the tie clasp and the necktie. And their reaction was that that's like McCoy's, or that is McCoy's.
Denise, in particular, according to Jim Tyson, said, well, that's Richard's. Where'd you fellas get it?
Okay, Denise is the sister-in-law. Okay, Denise is the sister of the wife of Richard Floyd McCoy. All right, and they're getting real close. Okay, because something's gonna happen where she breaks into tears.
He said, well, we got it off of the D.B. Cooper plane, and she broke into tears.
All right, but she doesn't change her statement. She did issue, false statements to the FBI, which basically set up Richard Floyd McCoy's alibi for the D.B. Cooper hijacking.
There are a couple of inconsistencies. One, McCoy was back at his residence in Utah, I think that Thanksgiving day, which would have been the day after the hijacking.
Okay, so this part is frustrating for me. It's frustrating because the only evidence the FBI has of this alibi of being back home at Thanksgiving in Provo is the statements of the sister-in-law and the statements, I think, of Floyd McCoy's wife. Okay, so basically the family is now putting up this wall of, I would say, Mormon loyalty, Mormon family loyalty. I mean, this steel trap of, dishonest, basically all coming consistent with their dishonest statements. And based on those dishonest statements, the FBI is now talking about an alibi, when really the federal authorities knew a lot more, and they knew that alibi was false, and that is demonstrably false. Okay, so now we know it is demonstrably false that the family was lying to set up this alibi.
But authors Russ Callum and Bernie Rhodes, they show that Richard McCoy, a devout Mormon, a non-smoker, a non-drinker, and a non-gambler, wasn't here in Provo. He was 372 miles away in Las Vegas.
And I can't help noting the parallel here with the Daybell case, because this whole Daybell family, this Daybell team, they really use Las Vegas a lot to do a lot of their logistics, right? For some reason, Las Vegas is kind of like the go-to. I wonder if Las Vegas is a place where maybe when Mormons get into a sort of a criminal mindset, Las Vegas is kind of like the place where you do your shenanigans, as part of a criminal whatever. It's just kind of a weird thing how it's sort of a pattern where Las Vegas keeps showing up in these cases. I'm just putting it out there.
There was gasoline bought by a fellow driving a Volkswagen with a North Carolina plate assigned to McCoy, okay? And he signed a gas ticket on his credit card, and the FBI laboratory said he wrote the signature, Richard McCoy.
And where was that gas bought?
And that gas was bought at that thrust station, power thrust station, just west of the airport, McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. Now, the other thing that puts him, there was a phone call made from the Tropicana Collect to McCoy's home at 11, was it 11:10 or 10:10? That evening, Thanksgiving evening.
What is a man that doesn't shoot dice, play blackjack, drink whiskey, chase women, smoke cigarettes, do in Las Vegas, Nevada on Thanksgiving?
Okay, so obviously he was in Las Vegas to launder money. Okay, so that's very incriminating, right? And it's just amazing how the FBI kind of doesn't want to talk about that. Something is up with the FBI. We'll get to that later. And then the final thing, when Richard Floyd McCoy was waiting for trial, okay, he was guarded by federal marshals in Salt Lake City, Utah, right? Okay, and while he was guarded by federal marshals, he was very open about talking about things. Maybe he wasn't very careful about what he was talking about. And he accidentally talked about the DB Cooper case and said things that nobody at the time could have possibly known. Okay, nobody knew at the time that DB Cooper had actually lost the bag of money while he was diving down from the plane. That there were issues with the skydiving.
The Federal Marshal Service assigned one man to guard Richard McCoy during his trial. John Seiler says McCoy talked openly about his own hijacking, the one he was on trial for, and he says McCoy claimed to know something about the Cooper hijacking, something that only Dan Cooper would have known at the time.
He said that in the Cooper case, when Cooper bailed out and his chute opened, the jolt jarred the money from his grasp, and he lost the money.
And that's been later cracked by that Delta Airlines captain I was talking about. But this is very interesting, and this is information only the person who committed the DB Cooper skyjacking could possibly know this part. Okay, so now this book written in 1991. Okay, the wife of DB Cooper, right? She made major lawsuit against these two former federal law enforcement people, and she made a major lawsuit and she quashed the book. So that book just sort of faded out of public consciousness, and people started forgetting about the connection between that United hijacking and Richard Floyd McCoy. It was completely off the public radar thanks to the family's aggressive legal action. Okay. And like I said, there's a former Delta Airlines captain who I really respect, and I'm putting his channel in the comments here, and you guys should really check out his. It's kind of an amateur. He doesn't, like I do amateur videos. He does an amateur documentary, but it's fascinating because this guy cracked the case. Okay, those two former law enforcement people. Okay, they did basically prove. I think they proved that Richard Floyd McCoy was DB Cooper, but DanGryder, this former Delta Airlines captain, DanGryder, he proved that what really prevented the FBI from figuring out the case was the family secrecy. And he pointed the finger more at the family secrets, right? So DanGryder kind of explains why the FBI wasn't able to really develop a case against Richard Floyd McCoy. It was because of the family secrets, and I'm going to say Mormon family secrets. So this is DanGryder.
In 2005, I ordered a book because I heard about a hijacking that you have not heard about. Somebody told me about another hijacking, April of '72, and I'd never heard of it. It got kept out of the media. FBI didn't want to talk about it, but apparently there was another DB Cooper style hijacking, April of '72, by a guy named Richard Floyd McCoy.
Okay, let's not forget here that DanGryder is a former Delta Airlines captain. Okay, this guy has a lot of privileged access to the aviation world. Okay, and even he could not find about that second United Airlines hijacking, right? So this whole story about Richard Floyd McCoy and any connection it might have to the DB Cooper mystery was completely squashed by the family's litigation back in the 90s, right? So that even an airline captain like DanGryder had no easy access to this, and he had to figure it out through maybe some, maybe there were other people in the airline business who still had a long memory and still knew about it, but it wasn't easy for him to get this information.
So I started looking around. It was the early days of the internet and couldn't find anything. I finally found a book that was for sale, but they were rare. Couldn't find these books. There's a hardback book, but they weren't being produced. So I ordered one and got it, and I read this book right away. This book is making a lot of sense. Back in 2005, a guy named Richard Floyd McCoy, the FBI called him a copycat, and here's what happened on this. Richard Floyd McCoy copycatted, according to the FBI, the D.B. Cooper jump, but he got caught. He made a few mistakes. He landed this time in Provo, Utah. And in this book, in the first couple pages here, it defines who all the players are in the Richard Floyd McCoy life. Well, who's the players? Guess what? There's some deep family secrets here. Richard's got a wife. He's a college student at BYU in Provo. He's got a wife. Her name is Karen. Guess what? Karen has a sister. Her name is Denise. Now they're all living in this small little house, which you're about to see, in Provo.
Okay, so starting around 2007, DanGryder makes strong attempts to get in touch with this family, the McCoy family. Okay, he really tries to reach out to these people. And I think DanGryder tries to do it in a very sympathetic way. But it turns out this McCoy family will not talk. They are a steel trap. I mean, these people are just unbelievably loyal, and they aren't talking, and they don't want to have anything to do with DanGryder. Okay, but DanGryder's a nice guy. He kind of persists. And then when he figures out that Karen, this is McCoy's wife, when he figures out that she has recently died, I think in 2020, this is just a couple of years ago, okay? And then once he figured out that Richard Floyd McCoy's mother in North Carolina has also died, okay, he makes another attempt, and finally he gets the kids. This is Shantae and little Richard McCoy. He gets the kids to admit the family secret. Okay, he breaks it. I guess he breaks the family secret, I guess because he's being very sympathetic, and he's trying to really understand as opposed to accuse these people. And so he gets the kids to admit the family secret.
From my perspective, of all the people regarding D.B. Cooper, everybody was willing to talk except the McCoys. McCoys were a steel trap. I got nothing out of the McCoys for all those years. Why?
Well, the big thing, the hijacking themselves, my mother was very culpable in both the hijackings. As far as my dad, when he escaped prison, the whole family was practically culpable in hiding him and helping with his escapes. Well, not helping. Mom helped with his escape from Lewisburg Penitentiary.
So D.B. Cooper was a Mormon Bonnie and Clyde husband and wife team effort. In other words, the wife, the mother of this little Richard McCoy, the wife, a Mormon wife, right? She was intimately involved not only in the hijacking, but also in helping Richard escape from federal prison. That's a whole other story. This guy's a crazy criminal. He actually was able to escape from a federal prison.
But when he was on the run, there was a good portion of the family that saw and had contact with Dad while the FBI was around.
Do you believe that your mom was a culpable accomplice, helped plan, coordinate, and pull off both hijackings?
100%. I do know, I was told this actually by my mom and by other people, that my dad would be upset that if he didn't get the majority of the credit. It was definitely my dad's idea, my dad's mastermind, more so to speak.
Was your dad, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., was he D.B. Cooper?
Yes, he was D.B. Cooper.
Now, to me, this is incredible. This kind of reminds me of Lauren Matthias from Hidden True Crime. Okay, Lauren Matthias doesn't just have a YouTube channel. She's not just a YouTuber, but she really gets to know people, and she gets a lot of information from people. Okay, so DanGryder is kind of like that too. He's not just a YouTuber. This guy's a former airline captain. He's a flight instructor. He's really interested in airline safety and aircraft safety. And he just goes around the country, really just gifting his time. He gives speeches and talks at like flight schools and stuff. And he makes friends with people, and he really solves crimes. And I think he really solved the D.B. Cooper mystery. And he revealed a Mormon connection. And he revealed that this case had been kept locked-tight secret due to Mormon family loyalty.
You asked him, where was he the Thanksgiving the year before, the day of the D.B. Cooper hijacking?
He was adamant that he was home. There was no question in his mind. And there was no question in my mind that he was not.
Okay, you guys might not recognize this guy in the interview because he's aged so much, okay? But it's the same Bernie Rhodes, okay? Bernie Rhodes was the former federal probation officer, okay, who helped write the book along with the other guy. I can't remember his name, Callum. I think his name is Callum. But they're the ones that wrote the book, The Real McCoy, the book that was squashed, okay? So this is... He's really old now, and it's amazing. They've been able to keep the family secret enough to let everybody get old, everybody who knows about the case to sort of age out. But here we have the issue of the alibi, and so that's the one missing link. And it turns out that Richard McCoy's sister-in-law is still alive.
I want to see Denise because she holds the key to that one piece of information I want to know. Where was Richard on November 24 and 25 of 1971? She originally covered for him with an alibi that said that he was at home on November 25. The FBI interviewed her and she said unequivocally he was there on November 25 with the family. So he could not have been D.B. Cooper. But is that really true? And if it is true, how is it that Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. was in Las Vegas? We know he was in Vegas. We've got solid proof of him being in Vegas on November 25. Why would Denise cover for him? And is she willing to alter that alibi after 50 years under no penalty to her at this time? Is she willing to tell what the real truth is? And I want to know. And I'm going to ring her doorbell and I'm going to ask her.
Okay, so here DanGryder is going to go talk to Denise, the sister-in-law, and she was also a conspirator, let's not forget, okay? And I think she, in a way, is a little bit analogous to Melanie Pawlowski, a little bit analogous, because she has this extreme loyalty, where she's been able to just straight up lie to the FBI for decades. I mean, decades. This case has been kept secret for 50 years, right? And so for decades, you can just tell bald-faced lies to the FBI and essentially to the national public. Keeping one of the most notorious and one of the most famous air hijacking crimes in American history, keeping it as an unsolved case. Okay, and what for just family loyalty. So I think it's very similar to Melanie Pawlowski. Okay, because she's gonna end up saying things to DanGryder, right? But you can tell she's still holding out. And she's just not willing to give the whole truth. And it just reminds me of, like, say, Zulema and Melanie Gibb and Melanie Pawlowski, that even when they do cough up some truth, they just keep to themselves the full truth because it would implicate them.
Why am I the story?
Well, you know why. You testified in the first place.
Yes. You testified and you were there and you were there for the whole thing. Because, see, you were in college at Rick's in the fall of 71.
Right.
That's the semester you spent up there. But Rick's had fall break for Thanksgiving during that week.
Right.
Which November 24 was during the week that all the kids were off. So you would have been back in Provo babysitting for that week.
Right. And I had from my recollection, it was that they went to California.
Okay, this is a huge change in her testimony. This is a huge confession because she had agreed with Richard Floyd McCoy and his wife, okay, his wife Karen. She had agreed to say that Richard Floyd McCoy was at home in Provo for Thanksgiving. But now for the first time, she's saying, well, they went to California and I was for a few days babysitting. This is huge.
That's what they told me.
Right.
Okay, so... and that fits in with Vegas, I guess.
Sure.
That would fit in with Vegas.
But you were the babysitter while they were gone for a few days.
Yes.
And if your recollection is that they told you they were going on vacation to California,
that was it. Yep. That was it, and I know that I was at home watching the kids.
How many days straight, you think?
I would say 3-4 4, something like that, you know.
But of course, what Denise is not admitting, and this is notable, she is not admitting that she was told to lie. She's not going to admit that, or at least she's not being pressed to offer that, but she's still holding back, okay? Because there's the additional piece is that who told her to lie. And clearly, between Richard McCoy and his wife, Karen, somebody had to tell Denise, you are going to lie, okay? Because she was basically collaborating with the D.B. Cooper skyjacking.
Between the makeup, Raleigh cigarettes, and sipping bourbon, his disguise was perfect. Because who would suspect a devout Mormon family man in Provo, Utah? No one made that connection. And I think he enjoyed that.
So I don't mean to offend anybody, okay? I really don't mean to offend anybody, but we cannot discount the element of Mormon loyalty and even Mormon pride. Mormon pride and Mormon loyalty. Let's look back. Let's look back at Alex Cox. Alex Cox being interviewed about supposedly killing his brother-in-law in self-defense. Alex Cox was so confident. He was so calm. He was so authoritative, because I think there is just a tiny bit of that Mormon pride that we are so upstanding and we create this impression of credibility and we can sort of get away with stuff sometimes, and I do think that's a little component, And I think you can see that also in the D.B. Cooper case, this idea that Floyd McCoy was really getting away with something, and he was using his Mormonism as part of his protection, including his family, right? And so now as we try to look to the future, like when do we think that Melanie Pulowski is going to finally come clean? When do we think that Zulema is finally going to tell the truth? When do we think that Garth and when do we think that Emma are finally going to, melt down and just tell us, well, the bottom line is we'll never know, but I would predict, looking at the D.B. Cooper case, potentially they could just take it for decades. It might be 50 years before we know the truth. I mean, I hope for the best, but let's look at the example of Shantae McCoy.
Well, I know you've been dogging me for years here, Dan. As Dan may have indicated before, over the years, he has tried to contact me, my brother, even my mother.
Yeah.
And the one time I picked up and he clarified that he wasn't news. That was my first question, that he was just an interested citizen, basically. I still told him to, go away. We weren't talking. And what changed was that recently, not only my grandmother, but my mother died. And they were the two who stood to be the most damaged by anyone talking. And all these years, because I loved and adored my mother, I obeyed her wishes. And I wanted to protect her.
Okay, I loved and adored my mother, and I obeyed her wishes, okay? And I wanted to protect her.
It wasn't so much even a gag order, but a wish to protect the family.
To me, this is insightful and this is revealing. It tells me that in the Mormon world, when you love and adore somebody, there is also a sense of obedience, especially if it's a parent, If you have a parent and, the idea of loving and adoring them has to do with being obedient, okay? And the second thing is the wanting to protect, okay? And I really do believe that people that live in Mormonism, because Mormonism is kind of a minority religion and the whole world seems to be critical of Mormonism, I think Mormons themselves feel under siege, even if subconsciously. And I think Mormons have sort of an innate desire to sort of defend each other against the outside world. I think it's just an unconscious thing, and I think it shows up in these family crimes.
A wish to protect the family that has already suffered so much.
And maybe this is a kind of a leakage of what may be a very common Mormon feeling unconsciously, okay? That people that are in the Mormon culture may feel that they have suffered under the siege of their minority and being looked upon in a bad light by the majority.
And I can say that it's been the case since I was 4 years old. And even now talking, It conjures up a lot of emotion.
So a big credit to DanGryder for solving this case. Okay, I've left his information in the comment section or in my information section, whatever. I've left links to DanGryder's, his documentary on the DB Cooper case. And anyway, just some things to think about as we try to predict what to expect from the Melanies, from Zulema, from Emma, from Garth. And I think, if we're going to learn anything about this, we may learn a lot from the DB Cooper case. Oddly enough, the DB Cooper case has a lot to say about what we can expect in the future, trying to get the real truth in the Daybell case. So appreciate your patience and thanks for watching.